Hello again and welcome back. My name is Tom Nelson and this is video lesson number 2, part number 3. This is how diabetes messes with cellular function. This is all part of a very large video lesson on diabetes control, 6 steps to gaining complete control over diabetes. In the previous 2 videos, you learned about the organelles, those 37 trillion cells, those that have city hall, factories, power plants, and others, and you learned what they do basically. You also learned about your vascular system and how it feeds all of the cells in your body, especially the capillary blood vessels. You also learned about the receptors, the transporters, and the gates, and you learned the cause of insulin resistance. Now you're going to learn how diabetes disrupts those cells throughout your body. Those 7 areas in your body are that do not have those insulin receptors that regulate how much glucose can enter the cell are as follows. There's those 7 areas where the elevated blood sugar will cause and actually destroy cells. So they do not have that GLT1, which is what scientists call that insulin receptor. And if they don't have that insulin receptor, they do not regulate how much glucose can enter the cell. There's no way of restricting it. You recall how that receptor normally works. On the cells that have them, which is a large number, those will attract and capture insulin from the bloodstream, and when they pass through the membrane, they will open a gate that will allow 1 molecule of glucose to enter that cell. And if they don't have that receptor, there's nothing stopping that glucose from entering every one of those cells that don't have that receptor. So the areas that don't have that receptor are first your brain. And that will have a significant impact because every time your blood sugars go over 110, and the higher they go, the worse this is, those brain cells are going to start dying. It's going to overwhelm the glucose. If it's high outside of the blood cell or out of each cell, it's going to be very high on the inside of those cells. And if it's high on the inside of the cells, it's going to cause a massive amount of disruption in there that can actually destroy the cell. It'll go to City Hall and it'll overwhelm the DNA, and they will cause that cell to commit suicide. So if this happens in your brain cells, which is one of those 7 areas, you will lose cognitive function, your ability to enunciate things, to articulate what you want to say, to remember things. Your memory skills will fade. Your ability to learn new skills will fade. So basically, overall, your cognitive function is going to suffer. And it's permanent, and it's cumulative. The second area are the beta cells in your pancreas. Those are the insulin-producing cells that we talked about in the last video. And those insulin-producing cells will die. It will overwhelm them, and they will die. And little by little, over time, every time your blood sugars are high, and especially for an elevated amount for a long period of time, it's going to kill off all the insulin-producing cells in your pancreas, and you will eventually become insulin dependent. That means that your body isn't producing enough insulin to get the job done anymore, so consequently all of those cells will one by one die away to the point where you're going to have to take insulin shots every day to stay alive, to provide for the need that your body has. Intestines are another. It's going to cause all kinds of issues, digestive issues, constipation issues. It's cumulative as well, and it can be permanent as well. Your kidneys, it's going to damage those filters called nephrons. There's 1 million of them in each one of your kidneys. And as they die off, there's no symptoms. And as they're destroyed and damaged, you're going to lose your ability to filter your blood, and you can go into kidney failure. The red blood cells are also impaired, and your arteries are impaired. Your arteries will be damaged. It'll cause lesions, and those lesions are where arteriosclerosis will develop. That's the accumulation of plaque. Nerves, neuropathy loss. Your nerves are impacted in a couple of ways, not only through this glucotoxicity, but also because of damage to the capillary blood vessels that feed those cells when the blood sugars are high. So neuropathy will develop, and that means that these nerves are going to die, not only because of glucotoxicity, too much glucose entering them, but also because they're starved out by damaged capillary blood vessels. And so that tingling in the toes and fingers or extremities, a burning sensation, a very sharp pain, or an itching where scratching won't seem to fix it, and loss of feeling and function is going to result. It's called neuropathy. It's very common. So glucotoxicity, let's take a closer look at it. Whenever your elevated blood sugar is high on the outside, the elevated blood sugar is also going to be on the inside of that cell. Those endoplasmic reticulum, remember the factories, are going to be impaired. They're not going to be able to function properly. They're not going to be able to produce those amino acids, hormones, or enzymes properly. And so the function of that cell is going to falter significantly. And consequently, that cell will commit suicide and die. It's going to actually cause genetic damage inside City Hall, the nucleus, and it's going to cause matrix swelling. Remember the extracellular matrix up on the top up here and the right and the bottom. Those extracellular matrix will begin to swell, and they'll pinch off those capillary blood vessels that weave through them, and that will also cause issues because it'll pinch off the blood supply and the food, the nutritional supply to that city. So it sets up what's called cellular apoptosis, which is cell death. The genes, the DNA in your city hall will shut everything down and the city will die. So neuropathy is a little bit different. Neuropathy, whenever you have elevated blood sugar, and especially if it's in the bloodstream for too long, along with insulin, it starts to destroy those very tiny capillary blood vessels that feed all of those 37 trillion cells. So those cells will starve and die. They can't get the nutrients that those capillaries would otherwise survive or in supply. So the nerve cells will die, as well other parts of the body. It can happen in any one of those 7 areas, as well as glucotoxicity. So AGEs, those are extremely important. There's a video lesson particularly focusing on AGEs. They're called advanced glycation end products. It's whenever your blood sugar is high, glucose will bond to certain proteins in the body, and it causes massive amounts of inflammation and damage. Those AGEs and neuropathy together damage those nephrons, those very, very fragile filters in your kidneys, and it causes inflammation that also contributes to the damage. It disrupts the receptors on the glomerulus, which is up in this area. The glomerulus is a diaphragm sort of thing. It's a filter, and it filters your blood, and anything that shouldn't go through it will be dumped into the urine. So whenever your blood sugars are high, those glomerulus malfunction. They're actually covered with receptors and transporters, just like the membranes of all your cells. And those transporters and receptors start to malfunction in the kidneys whenever your blood sugar is elevated, and it'll stay that way for as long as your blood sugar is elevated. And so consequently, your kidneys will malfunction, and they'll dump massive amounts of vitamins and minerals and fluid into your urine. And that's why when your blood sugars are high, you urinate so very frequently. So diabetes damages the mesangial cells in the filters of those kidneys, which are what usually is used by your kidneys to keep those filters clean. And that damage, again, is permanent and it's cumulative. So high blood sugar alters the cells of your artery walls and the smooth muscle cells. It causes an accumulation of cholesterol, artery plaque, and increased inflammation. Mitochondria uptake too much oxygen, which oxidizes fatty acids without producing any energy. So it's a wasted effort, and it causes a lot of heat, but nothing that is useful for the city in terms of energy. So it upsets the calcium regulation, which has other consequences, which can also contribute to cardiac disease. Diabetes and obesity inhibits the production of nitric oxide. So if you have diabetes or you're obese, your body does not produce the nitric oxide that's needed to keep the integrity, the health of your vessels in a pristine state. That's not only just your blood vessels, but your lymph vessels as well. So when that happens, it causes vasoconstriction. And vasoconstriction means that the muscles around the blood vessel will tighten, and it'll constrict the flow of blood through that vessel. It will increase your blood pressure. So diabetes impairs autophagy. That's what we talked about briefly in the last video. That's where your mitochondria that have no longer been used and junk throughout the city is cleaned up and removed to improve the health of those cities. So diabetes also contributes to that. So unfortunately, this is just the tip of the iceberg. You're going to learn significantly more about all of this as we go through the course. Unfortunately, it is just the tip of the iceberg, and all too often diabetics underestimate the damage that is being caused and accumulating. So now proceed to lesson number 3, part number 1. You're going to learn how your body produces and manages glucose. Thank you for taking the time and watching this video. Please pay it forward and share what you learn with others. Thank you.